Let's talk about like Chochmah, Binah, and Da'as and what that actually looks like practically speaking, because this is really, really cool stuff, okay? So first of all, we have this idea that there are these Sphirot, right? And the Sphirot are basically godly attributes that God uses to interact with the world. And so too, because we're created in God's image, we possess these same attributes. The difference between us and God is that God's attributes are perfectly balanced, whereas as human beings, we're born out of balance. And our job in life is to try to balance these attributes so that we express them in a way that's healthy and that we channel them through the godly soul rather than the animalistic soul. Now, the thing that we have to understand, I mean, Chabad is an acronym. It stands for Chochmah, Binah, Da'as, which are the three intellectual faculties that God blesses us with, that he imbues us with, right? So let's kind of talk about these. So Chochmah is wisdom, right? It's this ability to kind of see the big picture, right? Binah, the opposite, is about understanding. It's about details, right? And Da'as is all about internalization. It's all about, being able to take the big picture and the details and respond to it in a way where it comes down and impacts you on an emotional and interpersonal level. An example that's very famously given, imagine it's the 1950s, right? And let's pretend I'm a physician, I'm a doctor living in the 1950s, and outside my hospital, I'm having a cigarette, right? So some person comes up to me and says, hey, doc, that's really not good for you, right? Now, upon hearing this, I'm like, what? What are you talking about? It's not good for me. This one point, hey, that's not good for you, gives rise to hundreds of questions, right? Well, what about cigarettes is not good for me? How many cigarettes do I need to smoke in order for them to have a negative impact? How in the world are these cigarettes impacting me negatively? How are they impacting my organs? All these questions come from this one little point. So our doctor goes to the laboratory and he does research. He digs deep. He's trying to figure out what ingredients are causing all these problems. He garners lots of data. He runs tests. He's reasoning. He's figuring this out. And he discovers, in fact, cigarettes are in fact not good for you. That's Binah. Now, when the doctor himself stops smoking, now he's internalized both, the initial question or the initial point and all the data that he discovered and created. Now he's internalized that he himself has stopped smoking. Now he's at the level of Da'as. Now, the thing that's really interesting about this whole thing and why it really spoke to me is that I started conceptualizing mental health disorders based off of imbalances and incorrect expressions of the Sphirot. There's a major difference between depression and anxiety. One of the major differences between depression and anxiety is both have racing thoughts, right? If you're depressed or anxious, you're going to have racing thoughts. But if you're depressed, your racing thoughts are going to be rooted in the past. If you're anxious, your racing thoughts are going to be rooted in the future. This is very important, okay? Because think about it like this. Chochmah is wisdom. Wisdom exists always in the past, right? Even colloquially speaking, past wisdom dictates, right? Wisdom is something that's always related to the past. Conversely, Binah is understanding. It's something that we arrive at. It's always future-oriented. So this is where the Kabbalah stops and where the Charles begins. I have this idea that if we channel Chochmah instead of through the godly soul, but through the animalistic soul, it's actually, it turns into depression. When the past is twisted, when it's not reflected correctly, it turns into depression. Conversely, Binah, when it's not, reflected correctly, when it's channeled through the animalistic soul, it's actually anxiety. And what about Da'as? Da'as is the ability to internalize things. It sits in between Chochmah and Binah. What's Da'as when it falls out of balance? When we're not able to internalize something appropriately, that's what trauma looks like. Now, the thing that's really cool is this is a nice conceptualization of these three most prominent mental health disorders that I face in practice. But the thing that's really cool is it also illustrates a way to overcome these disorders. Think about how we could actually use these Sphirot in mental health. So the thing that I do is I'm taking right now different mental health disorders, and if you apply them to the Sphirot and you understand where the imbalances are, you could then fix it. Remember what we talked about earlier, from the forest itself comes the handle to the axe. This is the thing that's really cool. If we know what the problem is, we can finally fix it. The thing is that people say, oh yeah, this is what's wrong with you. Do they ever look at it from a spiritual lens? This is what's really remarkable.